Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
What is, in your opinion or knowledge, the most evil place there is in the known world? I'm talking about specific areas, places. Not countries or very big areas. In the conventionally known world, that are full of dark energy, where horrible things take place. Provincial New Zealand. Sure, this is anecdotal and only an account of my own experiences. New Zealand is comprised of 4 main centers. Auckland is the largest with about 2 million people. Wellington the capital. Christchurch is the South Island's main population hub, and Dunedin the southernmost major city. Life for most revolves around these 4 areas. There are of course many towns and small to medium cities in between. The sea has a far smaller population with a far lower pop density. And this means rural is true, it is desolate, cold, and lonely. There have been hundreds of stories orally inherited about the strange myths, creatures, and spiritual curses that plague it. Fiordland, for example. It's glacial, picturesque, and no one lives there. Most of the terrain is not traversable by vehicle. If you get hurt, life flight is your best option, but many times they can't find you. Did you know in Fiordland, the topographical maps are often inaccurate? In the early 1900s there were massive development efforts occurring for industrial expansion, the war effort and the railroad, and yet it remained isolated. Within the Fiordland and its relative neighbor, Milford Sound, there are caves. People don't really go full camping out there unless they are dumb Eurotourists or shine-eyed backwoods locals. But if you go deep enough, search hard enough, the caves can be found. And they go on, and on, and on. There is little record of their expanse, and the Department of Conservation's moratorium on development into national parks has halted many canvassing efforts due to the nature of the beast. But my papa and I used to illegally go jade hunting and deer hunting down there. Tribe rivalry. We would often stow supplies in a cave mouth because there are no large game threats aside from boar, and they're too brain dead to take off with your cooking pot. Our hunting dogs would not enter some of them. They wouldn't even approach the cave. We would have to tie them down around 100 meters away or they'd take off, barking like mad. We never outright saw anything but when you're hours from another person, even by car. Despite the relatively small land size, the roads are terrible off the main highway. You strangely don't feel alone. You feel watched. It was never consistent and it varies wildly, as did the dog's reactions, but the hindbrain is usually right. Now, the North Island is a different freak. There are so many more people and so much less land. Where we are from, far up the east coast, we don't get tourists. No foreigners. The odd oil rig scout, but they're always scared off by belligerent locals, my papa. Life is rough out here, anon. It's depressing, soul-sucking, and oppressive. It feels like you can't breathe. And never have I seen the level of violence in a Western nation as I have here. The brutality of the bearings. The indifference of people towards sheer human cruelty. My uncle owns a sheep station near enough to Gisborne. Massive. More sheep than most cities. His farm hand attacked a 4-year-old before snapping his dog's neck. Police arrived. Kid was taken into the system, then released back 2 weeks later. Almost had a murderer in the family, wouldn't that have been cool? The farm hand will get it eventually. And that's not unusual at all. There's something rotten here. People lose their humanity like it's a pair of socks. The Irwin ranges are fun. That's where we are from. Beautiful and with plenty of bloody history. We would also hunt there and again, caves. But you find many weird things. Found an old Ford truck in the woods once. Can't for the life of me figure out how it got there, even 50 years ago. Found a full set of clothes, abandoned and molded. Underwear included. There's probably someone hanging that I just never noticed. But back to the caves. My knowledge of those is more extensive. They're usually low but continue on at tight twists for kilometers. There's always a strong draft and a sweet, earthy smell. Never had a bad-smelling one. But the dogs would go berserk, howling and snapping at their harnesses. Always made me edgy, honestly. As a kid, we would stay up in Mangapohatu. Look it up. Plenty of myths and stories. Only one I can confirm true is the weeping. A common theme across the world, but it was scary. Just imagine laying in bed, 7 years old, cold and tired, and you hear a woman grieving in the distance. While you're in the middle of a rainforest with no one for miles and the adults are passed out from whiskey. The dogs are going nuts and it's torrential rain. Apparently the further away it sounds, the closer she is. But I'm Tuho, maybe that's why she left me alone. I don't know. Could go on and on, but mobile fed posting.
Fellow Kiwi here. Can relate to a lot of this. New Zealand was one of the very last places to be settled by humans, and it shows. There are places out here in the wilderness that have never seen humans before. I've been out in the bush and even on some pretty well-trod tracks you can't help but feeling like you're being watched by something distinctly non-human. And New Zealand has a domestic violence problem for sure. Meth doesn't help this at all. A lot of rural New Zealand is just full of hopelessness and depression. I wouldn't trade it for anywhere else in the world, but the country is far from perfect. Also caving in this country, it's spooky. Pick semi-related from an old mine in the Coromandel. Out of places I've been, probably Northwestern Maine has some of the vilest areas. It's for a pretty simple reason too. Because it's definitely the most isolated area in the Northeast. There's no highway going through it in Canada either. So essentially once you go north enough, you're hours away from any kind of civilization. It's not like Alaska-type remote. But it's the feeling that if anyone on this side of America wanted to never be seen, they'd go here. Anyway, going into extremely small communities there feels like stepping into an area you aren't supposed to be in. I remember hiking with my friend and we stumbled upon this small housing complex before we go onto the main trail we were looking for. There were maybe like 6 to 8 houses and they were all around 30 to 40 feet apart. There were lights on in all the houses, but there was no one outside and no cars at all. Both of us kind of pretended there was nothing off about it and we speed walked out of there before going, holy shit, that was weird. I'm not a superstitious person, but I've also made it a habit to get out if I get a weird gut feeling in any isolated, desolate area near a city or town. More so than if it's in the middle of nowhere.
Please tell us more about the housing complex where this was at.
Not 100% sure because we weren't exactly looking for this. But it was maybe like 50 minutes north of Moscow. Off 201. We were scouting out random snowmobile trails during the fall to see if we could get away with driving his truck really fast down them. Here's a pic I found off Google that shows how middle of nowhere Maine usually looks. It's some Air Force station they stopped using in the 90s.
Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I'm going to get real honest and real personal. On 4chan's meme board. Great idea, right? I'm an atheist. I'm not superstitious. I am Brazilian. I left when I was a child. Through hard work and extreme luck, I've landed a job in the U.S. Department of Defense and earned my citizenship. It has been a long time. I've been overseas. I've served. I've lived life. I still get nightmares about being in Brazil. Like, in a dream, I'll take up and see I never left. There were some times when I almost didn't make it through my path in life, and deportation looked like a very real possibility. Every time that happened I was fully prepared to self-end myself instead of letting that happen. I don't believe in superstitious things, but if there is one thing that makes me believe in curses and the like, it's Brazil. How can one country so rich in natural resources and culture be so messed up? So corrupt? So disturbing?
Small town Argentina friend here. Quite close to Brazil too, and I can also confirm this black magic shit. They call it macumba here, pronounced macumba. But it is really sad to see all those animals being killed because they kill cats here too, and I haven't heard about it, but it wouldn't surprise me if they killed dogs as well. They do all sorts of crazy shit for either the pettiest curse, and I'm talking broken hearts and TV plots like that, or some small win, not necessarily monetary but very well can be. I've heard a story about an aunt of a friend of mine that was into that shit and went to a cemetery to gather dirt from the tombs with a friend of hers. The story goes they needed dirt from 3 different places, and after picking up the first one they started feeling uneasy, but these kinds of people are already way up, or should I say down, into bad vibes, so they just shrug it off. Not a lot of people will get what I mean, but seeing we're on X, I trust this resonates with someone. After getting dirt from the second one, they started hearing something between a howl and someone saying their names, like a really nasty noise. And from what I've been told, when they started picking up dirt from the last grave, her friend told her to look and she saw a black-robed man running/speeding at them. Of course they thought it was death itself. The aunt took off running, but allegedly her friend couldn't make it. And my friend doesn't know what happened to her friend, but his aunt's life went downhill pretty quick from that point on. I'm talking about getting schizophrenia. They just say she went insane and his husband left her for it, and taking the kids, losing her house and job too. From what I've been told, she's homeless now and no one in the family is willing to lend a hand. It's kind of like they know she brought this to herself, but subconsciously.
Carlsbad, New Mexico. This place is full of darkness. Witchcraft is widespread but never openly talked about. The people are all weird, crazy, ignorant, mean. Hills have eyes, people that don't have any idea how people are in the outside world, and they're held back from meth. But take care of by family and other tweakers, and you can talk to them and they'll make no sense at all, and you just know they're never gonna get help or even be expected to, because it's just accepted that things are screwed.
Spain. People hate each other with passion, and all their actions are based on the principle of, I don't mind suffering if the others suffer too. It's crazy how mad people are over here. There are constant fights over everything. Your neighbors will key your car or call the police on you to harass you. This is hell. You just have to open a history book. This country is only okay when a dictator tells people to behave like human beings. And now with plague stuff is hitting the fan, neighborhoods are full of snitches making life impossible for each other.
Bagdad, California. Or really any settled land in the middle of the southwestern American desert. Burnt out shacks from 30 years ago, being passed by at 80 miles per hour by motorists. Yet a single rickety house with a junkyard-like garage is clearly being lived in. What do? Clearly meth, but you can get those people in any city. These people have something else inside them to be able to live in such an inhospitable and unattractive place for so long. Complete wasteland surrounding them with no clear support or contact with others.
There's a lot of dark things that go on in Vegas behind the scenes. Small towns and cities in the Appalachian region, also surrounding states that have been intensely impacted by heroin. Ohio specifically. All these places are very subtle compared to Africa and the Middle East though.
There are drug addicts living in the sewers. And mole people, actual mole people that look human but they are not.
They're not sewers, they're flood control channels. When I was a teenager, around 15 years ago, we would use them as shortcuts to get from one part of town to another. Especially when we would skip school so the police wouldn't catch us walking around truant. A lot of times you'd find a cool group of bums and they would buy us beer, and sometimes we would hang out for a while. One time a paisa dude that was hanging around attacked one of the main bums when she was drunk, and her husband smashed his head in with a rock. That was the first time I saw someone get killed and saw a dead body. I can still smell what the inside of his head smelled like. A doctor I know told me that it was the spinal fluid. During the monsoon season, the bums will get washed away and drowned sometimes, especially the ones that are too faded to wake up or that are trying to save whatever possessions they have in their camp. On the east side of town, where all the rainwater dumps out into the wetlands between Vegas and Henderson, the tunnels are haunted because of this. If you go near Charleston and 95, the tunnels here are all haunted from the bums that either drown during the monsoon or overdose on heroin. There's a tunnel that runs along Wyoming Ave near Sandal here as well. And in the 60s, when Wyoming was a dirt road, a young couple crashed on a motorcycle and were flung into the wash, which was just a ditch at the time, while it was full of water and both of them drowned. If you are walking around late at night, you can still hear a motorcycle hauling ass back and forth down Wyoming sometimes. Now that the area is more populated, it's a rare occurrence, but if the veil is thin that night or you're one of the people for who it always is, you can still hear it. In Green Valley there's a park that's haunted as well. It's called Fox Ridge off of Warm Springs on Val Verde. I used to hear stories that a little boy died there or was kidnapped or something, and that one of the swings on the playground would push itself. I always thought it was bullshit, but the swing really will push itself every great once in a while. And I don't mean a little push. I mean go up in the air like if a kid was really on it swinging. There's a tree line behind the swing set that really gives me the creeps for some reason too. Lastly, there are fair folk that live in Sunset Park, which is a large-ish park with a big pond near the airport, on Eastern Avenue between Sunset and Warm Springs. I was on a small dose of mushrooms one time and walked from the nearby graveyard, following the train tracks across Warm Springs and into the park. My friends and I came across a mound with a house on top of it that looked just like a stereotypical elf house or hobbit house, with a tree in front that was perfectly groomed to be rounded like you'd see in a picture. We were all too afraid to go right up to it and kind of ran off. But then we came right back to get a better look and it was gone. The mound that it sat on was there, but the house was totally gone. I've been to that park 100 times before and since, and there is no structure that we could have mistook for such a house. it does not exist. We were also on a really small dose of shrooms, like maybe 1/3 of a gram each. I've accepted that at some point we just walked through the veil. And we're lucky enough to get spooked and go back through again. I don't know what would have happened if we had tried to go inside the house. Since that day I've met a few people who have seen the fair folk themselves within the park. It makes sense that they would choose to live there, for such a small area of the city. There are actually big sections of the park where no person will walk through for days and days. And speaking of that railroad track as well, it actually connects the last two areas I've mentioned, the area with the haunted park and the area with the fairy park. If you follow the tracks past the haunted park, they cut through a large, natural wash, and there's a large wooden railroad bridge that sometimes really gives me the creeps at night as well. It's the only structure like it in the whole valley, and at night you can hear the Colorado River bullfrogs, which secrete DMT and sound like women screaming. That was going to be my last post, but I thought of one other spooky area worth noting. Most people know of Mount Charleston, which is the most prominent peak in the state, and Mount Potosi. But north of the valley is the Sheep Mountain Range. If any of you have heard the legend of Kenny Veach and the M Cave, this range is where the cave supposedly was. A cave shaped like a perfect capital M that made his body vibrate and which he was looking for again when he disappeared. Just north of this range is the Nellies Range. Bombing range, not mountains. It's actually a dry lake bed in Area 51. Just east of it is Nellies Air Force Base itself. The Nellies Range is where the tales of the tall white species of alien take place that the U.S. Air Force supposedly know about. I don't think it's any coincidence that if you're in the Vegas Valley, the best place to spot a UFO is directly above the Sheep Range. Also, it's called the Sheep Range, but I see more carcasses than sheep there.
I am in the Army stationed in Fort Irwin, California. This place really is in the middle of nowhere. It's a 45-minute drive to the nearest town, Barstow, which is a hellhole itself. This entire area just feels off to me during the day, and during the night here it is terrifying, especially in certain areas. We were doing land navigation once in this area located in a hill complex about 4 miles down the road, and during the day it just felt off and not right, but during the night when I was out there alone finding my points it felt demonic. I really felt as if I was being hunted and watched. I have been in many other places at night and have never felt anything like that. The next day I talked to 3 of my friends and they told me they all felt the same exact things. Here at Fort Irwin we do 10-day-long training exercises in the field each month, and one time we parked our tank in this one hill complex out in the training area, which is the size of Rhode Island, by the way. Anyways, we did that and the entire crew of our vehicle had weird dreams and restless sleep and felt that same bad presence. I woke up 10 times that night and had dreams we were driving around the hill complex, but there were torn up bodies everywhere. Other vehicle crews that were within the same hills also said they heard weird things and or could not sleep. Truly a messed up place, and also self-end rates here seem to be abnormally high, but that's just the Army in general.
Fort Hood, Texas. As a chaplain, I have seen and heard a lifetime's worth of depressing, nauseating, messed up stuff over there. I guess it's a self-perpetuating cycle, that people who get stationed there with enthusiasm will become cynical, hollow and devoid of anything resembling their former self, due to the influence of everyone around them having already made the transformation. I had to conduct a dozen funerals, of troopers who lost their lives because of other troopers or incompetent leadership. It's always other people. Thankfully my battalion was safe from successful self-end attempts during my contract, but Fort Hood has the highest self-end rate of any military post, and I've heard enough from troopers and fellow chaplains in sister battalions to prove it. The place draws the devil out of everybody, and the high command does an about-face and pretends to be deaf regarding this issue. There is a high chance that money laundering, human trafficking and prostitution rings are a real thing over there, and most likely, folks with stars and eagles on their chest are involved in them.
Frank Slide, Alberta is quite bizarre. The Indian tribes living in the area since time immemorial always avoided staying in the valley of Turtle Mountain pick related, as the valley and the mountain were considered evil or some shit. White people who settled the area started a shitload of coal mines and didn't care where they made their settlement. In 1912, a large section of Turtle Mountain broke off and slid down the mountain, destroying the town and much of the valley. The resulting boulder field itself is unsettling, as are the woods on the north side of the valley. In fact, the rest of the Crowsonist Pass, the general area, Municipality has a strange feeling to it and is full of old Indian legends. Look up Lost Lemon Mine as well as contemporary ghost stories related to the mining tragedies, Hillcrest mine disaster, and deaths.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.